nerds, what's up? So today I thought it would be fun to go through all of my 5-star SFF reviews. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know it's really hard for me to give a 5-star review. I much rather give a 4 or a 4.5. I really try to reserve 5 stars for the books that really blow me out of the water and are kind of books that I would recommend uninhibited. Like I would recommend to pretty much every single person. So this will be my 5-star books from the last decade. I have kept since 2013 all of the books I've read in an Excel sheet, which I'm not going to show you because it's messy and I don't want you to see my messy Excel sheet that's unformatted. But I've been keeping since then, since I don't have a Goodreads, but I didn't start keeping my star ratings till around 2019 when I got more involved in the book community. I also just started reading a lot more starting in 2019. Previously, I only read from like 12 to 20 books a year, but once I got more into the book community, I started reading a lot more than that. So here's what I'll say. Most of these 5 stars are probably within the last 5 years from when I started keeping track, but I did go back to the previous 5 years and pick out the books I was pretty positive would have been a 5-star rating. That being said, this is not every book I have ever loved, obviously, only within the last 10 years of my adult SFF reading. Most of these are going to be in descending chronological order going backwards, but if there was an author that received a 5 stars, I just pulled all of their books forward just to kind of keep it a little bit more organized. And if you stick around to the end, I will give a quick flyby on all the 5 stars I gave that weren't in the SFF genre. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's start with the book that actually gave me the idea for this video, which is A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. Now, this is the first in the Age of Madness trilogy and my first 5 stars for Abercrombie. It's funny, if you guys have watched some of my other videos, you'll know that I really love the First Law series. It made one of my top 10 favorite series of all time, but I've mostly given them all 4 or 4.5s. But man, A Little Hatred, it was hyped to me a lot and it didn't matter. That book deserves every moment of hype. It was so good. I can't even believe people say it's the worst of the trilogy. I am just so excited to finally continue that trilogy. I know I'm going to love it. Next up is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This was my first Mark Lawrence. I just did a review on this, so I'll link that there so you can go and watch that full review. But I absolutely fell in love with The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and obviously I'm gonna go back and read much more of Mark Lawrence's backlog. Next up is actually a book I haven't talked about on my channel that I read this year, which is A Slip of the Keyboard by Terry Pratchett. Now this is cheating a little bit because this book is actually Terry Pratchett's nonfiction. It is a collection of his nonfiction essays that he wrote, and it was incredible. You guys know I'm obsessed with Terry Pratchett, but this one was just so good. He is so eloquent and he has so much to say, and the first bits are a lot on things I've tried to talk about on this channel before, of course said a million times better because it's Terry Pratchett, about how SFF isn't taken seriously and why it should be, and on writing and just on life. It is fabulous. If you like Terry Pratchett's works, I 100% recommend you read this. And I've also heard of several people who like Terry Pratchett's writing but aren't into Discworld. If that's the case, also pick up this nonfiction. I promise you'll love it. But while we're on Terry Pratchett, there are some Discworld novels that I have also rated 5 stars. Those being Reaper Man, Guards, and Weird Sisters, which have been my 3 favorite of Discworld so far. I don't think any of those will be a surprise. Maybe except Reaper Man. I don't think people love Reaper Man as much as I tend to. I just love that particular death storyline. People tend to not like the other storyline in that book, but I did. Guards, and Weird Sisters are widely loved, so I don't think that's a surprise. I also rated Good Omens, which is by both Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, also 5 stars. Good Omens is one of my top 10 favorite books of all time, so no surprises there. Next up is Gladia by Madeline Miller. This one's a little different because this is the only one on my list that is actually a novella, so I don't know how much it counts, but I kept it in here because I'll also pull up Circe by Madeline Miller, which I also rated 5 stars when I read it. Fun fact, Circe was the first book I ever posted on my Bookstagram, so there you go. Love Madeline Miller's writing. I am so excited for her next full-length novel. She is a great writer. Next up, we've got Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Now, I finally got onto the Octavia Butler train last year. I've been dying to read her forever because she's such a legend, and she did not disappoint. I've read 2 of her books so far. Both were amazing, and I cannot wait to keep reading. Parable of the Sower is an amazing start. This is the first one of hers I read. It is an extremely intense book, but it proved to me, both of the books I've read of Butler's, she's one of those authors like Pratchett who just saw so much. Like, they wrote decades ago, but their books feel absolutely in the moment. Somehow they were able to see and pick the societal issues that really never change, and I'm always so impressed by that. If you haven't given Octavia Butler a chance, highly recommend Parable of the Sower. I also have Jade Legacy on the list by Fonda Lee. No surprise there. Greenbone Saga is one of my top 10 favorite series of all time now. Jade Legacy was the only one who got 5 stars though. The other 2 got 4.5s. Loved them a lot. Jade Legacy took it to a whole new level. Next, we have another series in which I gave the first and last books 5 stars, which is the Remembrance of Earth Past trilogy by Cixin Liu, in which I gave 3 Body Problem and Death's End 5 stars. That's actually kind of unpopular. Most people's favorite book is the middle book, which I really enjoyed, but it was not quite 5 stars like the first and last. Really loved that. One of my favorite trilogies of all time. This next one's kind of out of nowhere. A couple years ago, I wanted to do this whole history of fantasy reading list, and I did a lot of it. I'm still trying to work on it, where I look at fantasy classics and things that shaped the genre and important works. And at the last second, I threw in Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie in there because it is such a well-known story. I was taken aback by how much I loved it. Incredible. Teared up at the end. Just as someone who only had ever been with the Disney Peter Pan, I didn't really realize the deeper meaning that book had. Even having watched that origin story, whatever, it's like the play, the movie, I'll put it up here, I can't remember what it is. I've seen that, like I knew, but I didn't really know until I read it, and so I was super impressed by that one. A classic I highly recommend. Next up, The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Again, I've talked about this a million times on my channel, so no one's going to be surprised here. I love Liu's writing. This is the only one that I gave a full 5 stars to, though. A lot of the Dandelion Dynasty got 4 or 4.5 stars, but his short story collection, The Paper Menagerie, I don't know how many times I can just tell you guys to read this. It is an amazing collection. Highly recommend it. It blends fantasy, sci-fi, and magical realism. Next up, 2 books by the same author, Ted Chiang, with both of his short story collections, Stories of Your Life and Others, and Exhalation. I'm obsessed with Ted Chiang's work. It's hard for me to give short story collections 5 stars because I really feel like pretty much every single story, except maybe 1 or 2, have to hit at 5 stars. And Chiang is just, the stuff he talks about in technology and religion and society, it just hits every time. Again, short story collections, which I just mentioned 3, great ways to get out of a reading slump because you feel like you're kind of succeeding a lot because it's easy to kind of feel complete and finished since you're kind of reading a whole story. Recommend any 3 of these to get you out of a reading slump. They helped me a ton. The next one, to no one's surprise, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. You guys are all tired of me talking about Piranesi at this point. I was swept away by the book. I love it. I'll be posting my reviews if you've been noticing of reviews I've done on my channel. Highly recommend. Again, another really short book. I read that book in a day. I sat down and could not put it down. Okay, next up in the chronological order is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I have a lot of Sandersons that I put up here in the 5 stars. Some I've had to guess at what I would have given 5 stars, obviously, if they came out before 2019. So in my official ratings, I have Rhythm of War and Starsight. Starsight's kind of interesting because I think a lot of people liked Skyward better. I preferred Starsight just slightly to Skyward. Didn't really love the 3rd book, so we'll see how the 4th one goes there. But other than that, the books I would assume of his that I would give 5 stars, Way of Kings, Words of Radiance. Yes, I only didn't give Oathbringer 5 stars on this list. I know, that's unpopular, but here we are. Warbreaker, obviously Warbreaker is my favorite Sanderson. Mistborn: A Secret History, for sure. I love that novella. Emperor's Soul. Oh, Silence in the Forest of Hells. I always forget the name of that short story. Novella, whatever. And then probably Mistborn: Final Empire and Mistborn: Hero of Ages. I don't think at the time I read it I would have given Well of Ascension 5 stars, or when I reread it. I am interested if I'll change my mind now. It's been a hot minute since I reread the original Mistborn trilogy. Okay, that was a mess. Here's the list of the Sanderson 5 stars. There might be some surprises there of what were not 5 stars. Again, I give a lot of 4.5s and 4s, but here's my Sanderson 5-star list. Next up, The Martian by Andy Weir. Gosh, I loved The Martian. This is a great popcorn, fast science fiction read. Highly recommend. I actually haven't seen the movie yet, so I need to. I heard the movie's really good as well, but absolutely loved The Martian. It's my favorite of the 2 Weir I've read, even though Project Hail Mary was good. I had a few issues with that one, whereas The Martian was just straight perfection from start to finish. Another classic, The Handmaid's Tale. I debated whether I should put this in SFF or not. The dystopian is always hard for me to tell where I should put it, but I put it here. Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. It's a classic. Really enjoyed that one. Up next, The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. Now, when I read this book, I was blown away. I fell immediately in love with it. I thought Alex E. Harrow is my new favorite author. Fortunately, since then, I haven't loved a lot of the stuff she's written, but 10,000 Doors of January I just thought was so beautifully written, was such a great story. I have since found out that this book is hit or miss with people, so I wouldn't recommend this one as ubiquitously as I used to. You have to kind of like, I think, slower works and a little bit more of like purpley prose, but if you're that kind of person who's more like the literary fiction side of things, highly recommend 10,000 Doors. Next up, we have Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I absolutely fell in love with this book, which is interesting because Uprooted has a higher score, I'm pretty sure, the last time I checked. It's her more popular one. I personally didn't like Uprooted. I preferred Spinning Silver. It has some 3 great female characters. And as far as retellings go, I just feel like Rumpelstiltskin isn't a fairy tale that's retold very often. And so I really loved her take on that. Next up, Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. This is a really fun one. I read this randomly because I grew up loving the movie. My dad's a big Crichton fan, so he had read a lot. I think I'd read a couple other Crichton books growing up, but never Jurassic Park. And this one kind of took me by surprise because I do feel like when you grow up loving a movie first, sometimes it's hard to go back and read the source. In this case, it was amazing. It definitely added very different layers than the movie did. Still obviously love the movie, but if you grew up liking the movie, highly recommend checking out the book. I really enjoy, clearly I gave it 5 stars. Okay, now we go also more into the murky category of where I have to guess what I would have given 5 stars at the time. Now, during that time from 2013 is when I read the last half of Wheel of Time, and it's hard, it kind of runs together. I love Wheel of Time so much, it's kind of hard for me to figure out which book I would have given 5 stars. There are probably a few in Wheel of Time. I would hazard a guess that Memory of Light would obviously be a 5 stars, so I'll say that here, the last one, clearly. But I don't know what else in there. So a couple other, you choose. You choose which ones I should have given 5 stars. I also read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings for the first time. I think my guess would have given The Hobbit 5 stars, absolutely loved The Hobbit, and probably Return of the King 5 stars, maybe Two Towers and Fellowship 4.5. Yeah, that sounds right. I'm also gonna assume that I would have given Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card 5 stars. I fell in love with that book and read it several times during that time, so that would have been a 5 stars. And finally, a very random book, The Passage, which I read a long time ago. At the time, it was one of the most brutal books I'd ever read, but it really just like shocked me and took me in, so I'll definitely add The Passage to this list. Okay, and that is it for my SFF reads that are 5 stars. I think there might be some surprises on this list. There are some authors that I really champion and some books that I have highly championed that I gave 4 or 4.5 stars to. I just really reserve that 5 stars. I can't help it. I think it's kind of nice. And when I looked at this list, I felt extremely strongly by all the books on this list, obviously. I'd love to know any surprises for you down in the comments below, any surprises that were left off the list so we can talk about them. Any books that I have maybe convinced you to try to pick up, I'd like to know. Now, briefly before we go, I thought it would be fun just to throw up some of the non-SFF that I've given 5 stars over the last decade. These are a majority of nonfiction. I do feel like I tend to give nonfiction a higher rating in general, but also if I'm reading something that's not SFF, I've usually fully vetted it or it's been extremely recommended, which is another reason why it's a little easier to give them higher ratings. I'm not gonna call out every single one. I've put them into groupings to make it easier, but I'll call out a few I wanna talk about in this memoir section. If you haven't read I'm Glad My Mom Died, wow, that book, you've heard so much about it, but it was really a fantastic read. A horribly depressing, terrible read, but just really well done. I also feel like people are gonna call me out on this Mindy Kaling book. Look, I read this in 2015 with my best friend. We thought it was hilarious. We loved it. I am honoring 2015 me by assuming I would have put it in 5 stars. Don't at me. I don't really care that much about Mindy Kaling. For just straight up more classic nonfiction that's not memoirs, just a lot of fantastic books here. Some of them I've already recommended on this channel. I honestly would 100% recommend everything on this list. Loved all of these books. Finally, in fiction, I only have 2, which was Anxious People and Codename Verity. Codename Verity is a historical fiction, which I don't think I've ever liked a historical fiction except this one. So if you like historical fiction, make sure to check this one out. Let me know your favorite 5-star reads from this year in the comment section below. Also, let me know if you give 5 stars out like candy, or if you're like me and give those 4.5 out and reserve the 5 stars for things that are like particularly special. Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you like this kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye. So this author named Zach Argyle said that I had to put Stones of Light in this list. So here it is, Stones of Light. If you know, you know.